To welcome this next panel to the stage. Moderating today is going to be Scott Hubbard. He is an adjunct professor at Stanford University in the Department of Aeronautics and Astronautics. He's been engaged in space-related activities for quite some time. He's had more than 20 years with NASA, culminating as the director of NASA's Ames Research Center. He currently chairs the SpaceX Safety Advisory Panel, and he previously served as a NASA representative on the Columbia Accident Investigation Report. So many years of experience, and I believe tonight he is getting a very special honorary fellow award from the AIAA. So please, without further ado, let's welcome Scott and his panel to the stage. I think you're going to have to clap louder. How about that? Come on, that moment where I think there might be just a moment of technical. Here we go.
Still miking people up.
Oh, they're still miking people up. I am often too fast. Let's go over a few logistics and everything. We will go a few minutes past the time, but it's like we'll still have time to get to lunch for those of us joining us to hear Leonard David at lunchtime. I know Chris is going to make some announcements about where we're going to gather on Friday. If you guys are, some of you are still around and would like to go to the Hill with us to pass out the Human to Mars report, we desperately need hands and feet to help accomplish that on Friday. Again, I think we're still looking for that meeting place so that we can hand you those folders to do that. But if you're ready, able, and willing, we do accept volunteers for that on Friday. Some other things, again, lots and lots of great ideas that are being touted about. We're encouraging networking of all kinds. So let us make sure that you're gathering together, you're getting to know one another and exchanging things. And here they are. Oh, welcome, welcome. I said some really great things about you, by the way.
Wonderful. Well, let's see. It's still good morning. Good morning to you all. Delighted to be here. We're going to address a very important question this morning through noon and a little bit into the lunch hour, but I hope you find it worthwhile staying for. Because as you know, NASA has announced that this administration wants to return to the moon, but the directive that was written said very explicitly with international collaborators and commercial partners. So this segment here is going to address the issue of whether there is, how there would be a commercial enterprise at the moon, and could it maybe be extended, that model extended to Mars. So to evaluate this, we've got an excellent panel that is made up of experts in how the government approaches this, an individual that is looking at an international alliance, and someone representing one of the practitioners in the field, astrobotics. So to my left is Alex MacDonald, who is now in the Office of the Administrator at NASA headquarters, not far from here. And then my friend and colleague, Ken Davidian, who is the Director of Research in the Office of Commercial Space Transportation at the FAA. And those are the people who issue the licenses if you want to launch a commercial payload. And then next, Henk Rogers, who I think gets the Aloha Award for the day.
Henk always gets that.
He is representing the International MoonBase Alliance. He's going to tell us about it, and he has some materials that will be available to the audience during his segment. And finally, Justine Kasznica, who is an attorney by training and represents astrobotics. So let's just begin immediately with Alex. Tell us about the administration's Commercial Lunar Initiative and how that's going to work.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thanks, Scott. Good to be here with everyone. Always fun to come back to Humans to Mars. I mean, there really is actually a whole suite of programmatic activities that NASA has been undertaking under this administration to enable a return to the moon. The recent announcement and the recent budget amendment is just kind of the latest phase of that. So I'll just kind of walk through just kind of the four major commercial-related initiatives that I see falling under that set of lunar activities, and then kind of try to make the argument for why I think that's going to help us get to Mars quicker, because that was also part of the mandate of the panel.
Right.
The first programmatic effort out of the gate was the Commercial Lunar Payload Services Program under the SMD, the Science Mission Directorate. And that is a very significant program. It basically says we're going to be buying delivery to the lunar surface as a commercial service. We've now selected 9 different companies for IDIQ contracts, indefinite delivery, indefinite quantity contracts, with potential values up to $2 billion. We are also proposing in the FY20 budget $80 million a year simply for purchasing the services, and that is in addition to the $50 million for actual payload development under various potential PIs and NASA researchers. So right there, it is very clear that there is already the basis of a market. We have a government demand. We're buying services for science payloads to the lunar surface from commercial companies. And a number of international players are involved with that in various different ways. And of course, we have a kind of existence proof of that to a certain extent, which was the bare sheet impactor. I mean, had it been designed as an impactor from the start, it would have been a perfect mission success. But in all seriousness, it was a very successful mission, and it was very significantly privately funded. So it is a proof case that it is possible to have private funded missions achieve significant feats in lunar exploration. So that's kind of the first one. Now the most major one, due to the most recent announcements, is of course our approach to commercial human lunar landers. The recent budget amendment requested $1 billion specifically for commercial human landers. That is now the mainstay approach that we're going to take to get into lunar surface. Lots of trades on how that's going to be done and how many elements and various types of procurement mechanisms, but that is a huge commitment to procuring development, R&D, and potentially even services in a commercial manner for human landings. The gateway, though, is also still a critical part of the development of a market in the lunar vicinity. One of the reasons is that we are planning to launch the elements of the gateway on commercial vehicles. And as we continue to use the gateway, and potentially in the kind of phase 2, phase 1 is this period between now and 2024, phase 2 is this phase where we're trying to get towards an actual sustainable presence on the lunar surface and in the lunar environment. Potentially the gateway may kind of have additional international elements, but potentially additional commercial elements. And of course, by having a piece of permanent infrastructure out there, just like we had in low Earth orbit, we have a demand pull for extending commercial human spaceflight services out to the lunar environment. And then finally, we have now an emerging element related to lunar surface development. And this is currently kind of focused on the lunar, what do we call it again? The Lunar Surface Innovation Initiative in STMD. And this is just a new proposal under the FY20 budget. And the goal there is to start working on things like power systems on the lunar surface, potentially mining systems on the lunar surface. So we can start to see as a commitment to a wide set of initiatives that will create commercial markets. So why is that going to help us get to Mars? Well, by taking a broad approach to numerous providers, having a portfolio approach, what we have is a much more robust set of investments and providers for long duration activities, both on the surface and in orbit. Because we're not going to be, or we plan not to be, beholden to only one method of launch or one provider. We are much more likely to be able to be at the lunar environment for what we hope is going to be a very long and potentially even indefinite time. By having experience of operations for years at a time, both on the lunar surface and in deep space beyond the radiation belts, that's exactly the kind of operational experience that we need to prepare for some of the critical elements of getting to Mars. So that's kind of my basic summary of where we are in terms of encouraging commercial activities and how that's going to help us get to Mars in the long run.
I'm sure that there are going to be a ton of questions from the audience, but to give everyone a chance to lay the groundwork here, let's turn to Ken. Tell us from
How do we do clicking?
It's up on the podium, and we're told that you have to hold it down firmly. A mere click won't do it.
Okay, oh, and I've got a laser pointer. I don't know what to point at though. Okay, so hi everybody, my name's Ken. I work at the FAA Office of Commercial Space Transportation. I'm the Director of Research there. I've been running a 10 university consortium, research consortium called the Center of Excellence for Commercial Space Transportation for the last 9 years or so. Anyways, Scott asked me to be on the panel. He asked me 3 questions. What makes a market? How might this commercial space enterprise develop? And what are the necessary ingredients and pitfalls? So I just wanted to touch on those points. I'm going to probably show you things I not have before. If there's any social scientists in the room, I'm sure you'll have seen this. But the first thing we need to do, and press it long, you said, okay, is step 0 is level setting, almost literally. When you're talking about the social sciences, they commonly talk about embedded hierarchies. So you have the lowest level, which are the individual or the subunit levels, and these are referred to as intra-organizational. You've got the firm level, which is the organizational level, and then you've got the population, community, and field, and keeps going on up levels. These are intra-organizational. I gave examples there just for me. My name's Ken. I'm the individual. I worked, when I started my career, at the Space Propulsion Technology Division. That was a subunit of NASA Lewis, now Glenn Research Center. That's the firm. I was in the field, the population or the industry sector or segment or whatever of liquid rocket engines, which is part of a larger community of just rocket propulsion, because there's another population there of solid rocket motors, of course. And then this all fits within like the space industry. So you see how there's levels and embedded there. And where I'm talking today is at the inter-organizational level, at the community level and above. Other folks on the panel here are going to be talking at, maybe population level or firm level. So the work that NASA is doing is affecting maybe population or community level. So what does that look like? So what makes a market? So this is what you might normally see as a linear progression of industry tiers. Nothing is linear in society, so I show them as sort of like a strategy hexagon kind of board, where you see the raw materials are in the purple, infrastructure elements, support communities, and this is a ecosystem I put together for suborbital tourism. But you can see that there are developments in all of these areas that need to be developed for a given industry to thrive. And typically, whether you're talking about human suborbital or lunar commerce, that's going to kind of take place at the yellow and orange levels and down through the red, which is the retail services and the end-use markets. You're going to differentiate there. Everything upstream of that, raw materials, infrastructures, you're going to have a lot of commonalities from one market segment to the next. But developing all this and the relationships between these different segments is a major aspect of getting a successful business and making a successful industry. So the next thing I'm going to show you is probably the best model we have for how industries emerge, but it's going to be a little complicated. So there it is. So that is probably the best way industry that we have. There's a high level, a macro level, and I'm not using the technical terms, the quote unquote technical terms for this, because people read too much into the actual words. So I'm giving definitions. At the macro level, you have slow changing trends, as well as exogenous shocks, things like wars and famines and political upheavals. That happens at the highest level in very slow time frames. In the middle level, you have influential contexts of market preferences, industry, science, policy, culture, and technology. And these are things that are happening all the time. And typically the innovations at that level are sort of more the incremental innovations and things that are changing at a moderately fast pace, but not super fast. And then at the very micro level, where things are happening very quickly, these are the niche markets. This is where new ideas are coming and disruptive ideas are coming. And so that's where we are right now, right? Especially if you're talking about lunar commerce, this is where you are. For all these types of innovations to like coalesce into a dominant design, that's where all those little arrows come together into one larger arrow. So we haven't even gotten to that stage. So we're very early on in the phase of industries emerging. So the next thing I'm going to show you is what I think is not terrible, I shouldn't say that, a more simplified model, but ones that my managers, for example, might be more inclined to listen to, just because they can grasp it more. It breaks industry emergence into 3 different phases. concept, validation, and diffusion. But it still has a number of different dimensions: firm strategy, technology, investment, supply networks, production markets, and government, that need to evolve through these three phases. And according to this author, they need to evolve sort of in synchronous. They need to all go from this initial concept for whatever dimension you're talking about or element, and then they need to bridge this gap. So in the technology area, which we tend to talk about technologies, this author related it to TRL levels, which I think is one of the negative aspects of this model, but you can see how the TRL level will grow as the technology matures. And it's the same sort of thing. Investment, I know we talk about investment a lot, so it goes from a bootstrapping to a seed funding sort of state, but you've got to bridge this risk-reward gap in the process. So what this model is good at showing is that there are specific hurdles that an industry needs to overcome. These are the pitfalls that need to be overcome for an industry to emerge. And as you can see, there's quite a lot of them, and they're in a lot of different dimensions. So we need to, I think a lot of these conferences are getting much better at addressing all the different elements, not just focusing on the technologies or the investment perhaps on them. They're looking at a lot of these other elements. So that is all I had.
Terrific. All right, we'll come back, I'm sure, with questions for you about how this might apply to a lunar market. But before we do that, let's turn to Henk Rogers and tell us about the International MoonBase Alliance and what it is and what your hopes are for it.
Well, first of all, I came from Hawaii. I come from Hawaii. I'm not originally from Hawaii, but I get to start my speeches with an aloha. All right, thank you. How many of you know someone or you yourself actually, if you had the opportunity, would go to the moon for, say, a week? Okay, that's your commercial market. That's the end of my speech. No. So I have this mission. It's my actually mission number 3, which is to make a backup of life by going to other planets or other bodies in space. And of course, the obvious one in our solar system is Mars, because it's the most like Earth and it's already got a little bit of an atmosphere. So it seems like the obvious place for us to want to go and terraform and make it just like home. The moon, a little less so, because there's not enough gravity, blah, 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 all this kind of stuff. So, but here's the deal. So here I am, I'm on Maui, and I've just created a canoe. And so some of my friends are saying, let's try it. Let's do the 10-mile thing. Let's go to Lanai. And some of my other friends say, no. England is much more interesting. And I'm going like, yeah, but we just invented the canoe. Like, why don't we try it out first and see how it works for us? And if something goes wrong, we can always swim back, It's within reach. So let's do the easy thing first and make sure we got all the technology down. And pretty much going to Mars is the same thing, except it just takes more time. I'm wearing the Mars shirt. My kids bought it for me. It's my first time to wear it. So yes, I'm a big fan of Mars, but I believe that we have to go to the moon first. It just makes sense. And once we've worked out all the kinks on how to survive on the moon, then we have all the answers for living on Mars. Now I have a habitat on the big island on Mauna Loa called High Seas. It's the Hawaii Space Exploration Analog and Simulation, High Seas. I don't know, High Seas acronym. We worked with NASA, University of Hawaii, and NASA we're working together to study long-term missions on Mars. What does a long-term mission on Mars look like? First of all, you spend 8 months to go to Mars. And once you land, you have to wait 6 months while the Earth comes around so you can spend another 8 months coming back. That's 8 months in 0 gravity, followed by 6 months in 1/3 gravity, followed by 8 months. That is not an easy journey. If anything goes wrong in that entire journey, you die. So, so let's practice and get it down. I don't like the idea of not being able to resupply except for 2 years from now. I mean, that's sort of the heartbeat of missions to Mars. The missions to... So let me tell you a little bit about High Seas. High Seas, 6 people. By the way, NASA and the University of Hawaii, they were behind this project 4 months before the first crew showed up. They came to me and said, we have a problem. I said, what's the problem? Well, neither NASA nor University of Hawaii can own a habitat. It's like, what? And what would you like me to do? So, well, we would like you to own it, and then we'll rent it from you. I said, okay, I can do that, but if I own it, it's not going to be a piece of junk, because I know all these other ones have been like tin cans and plywood, and they're ugly and terrible, and they're not inspirational. I expect to be able to take students to go up there in the future when the missions are done, and inspire them to want to go to the moon or Mars. So we did. We made it really spiffy. It's got all this, what can I say? It's got creature comforts. By the way, the original engineers that were working on, nobody ever built a house. Nobody ever built a bathroom or a kitchen or a floor or a wall, and they were calculating stress loads on a new dome that they were going to design. I said, no, you've got 4 months. You've got 4 months. So we bought a dome from a company that makes domes for a living, said we want a door here and a window over there, and we hired a bunch of guys who make houses for a living to make the inside of the dome. The paint was drying, but we were done in 4 months. We did 5 missions in the space of 5 years, 4 months, 8 months, 12 months, and 8 months. And what a mission means is 6 people go into the habitat, into the 1,200 square foot, and we fought NASA, got an extra 200 square foot so that we could have walk-in bedrooms instead of crawl-in bedrooms. So we thought that was very necessary for people to survive for a long time, is to be able to change their clothes standing up. If they go outside, they wear a spacesuit, it was just meant to take the time to put them on and take them off and be a hassle when you walk around. So they were actually glorified hazmat suits. So that's all the EVAs were like that. And if they communicate with the outside world, that was a 40-minute delay each way. 20 minutes each way. So 40-minute round trip for you to talk to your wife or anybody back on Earth. The missions were successful. We learned a lot. We learned about crew selection, who to select and who not to select. I think we learned more about who not to select than who to select. So I've pivoted, and we've pivoted. So since those missions have finished, now I'm next set of 5 years. Hello. I got another 5 years from the DNR, the Department of Land and Natural Resources, to do research for another 5 years. What I'm doing in the next 5 years, what we're doing in the next 5 years, is we're studying what to do on the moon. And the difference between the moon and Mars is we're not about crew psychology. We're just talking about what's the environment that people are going to live in on the moon. What are how much stuff do we need? And I'm thinking that a MoonBase needs to be self-sustaining. Because if there's anything happens on Earth that goes wrong, whatever, we have to survive up there. There hasn't been a colony in human history that survived while depending on goods coming from the home country. So in other words, we have to grow our own food, make our own oxygen, filter our own water, everything. Let's just think there is not going to be a resupply. And if we do that, then we can multiply that MoonBase on the moon without actually asking Earth for help. So here's my big take on the whole deal. The big take is you got all these billionaires building airplanes, and you're going to like this, and there's nobody building airports. What is wrong with this picture? Somebody's got to be building airports. Somebody's got to be building spaceports. Somebody's got to be thinking about where we're going to go and what's going to happen once we land there. Rocket on the moon, the ejecta from that landing goes ballistic, and there is no atmosphere to slow it down. So if you've got an antenna or anything near that landing spot, it will be destroyed unless you bury it. Well, it'll be destroyed. So we really have to improve the surface and get a landing strip that doesn't have any moon dust on it, and clear it and harden it and have a place for rockets to land and take off multiple times. So that's the runway side of it. Then you need to have infrastructure. You need to have the living quarters. You need to have hotels, the quote unquote hotels. You need to have workspace. You need to have a place where you're going to grow food. You need to do all of that stuff. And we're not going to do it by bringing stuff from Earth. Because right now it costs $1 million a kilo to send something to the moon, maybe down. This is going up and down, I can hear it. And maybe it'll be $100,000 a kilo, but even at $100,000 a kilo, you're still not sending up concrete. We've been working on what's the replacement using ISRU, in situ resource utilization, to replace concrete, and we think we're there. We can sinter the moon dust or the moon rock, which is called regolith. By the way, the moon and Mars is very similar in this. They're pretty much made out of the same material. And by the way, Hawaii is made out of the same material. What's going on? So the Earth has something called plate tectonics. And when plate tectonics happen, what it does is it takes the surface rock, the oceanic crust, subducts it, and melts it and sends the lighter elements to the surface. These are called continents today. The continents is where we live, and that's where we get most of our minerals, and that's what we see when we look at the Rocky Mountains. The moon and Mars do not have any continental rock because they never had any plate tectonics. So it's all oceanic rock. Therefore, a place to test building a moon base is a place where you have oceanic rock. Well, that limits the places where you can do this to places like Iceland, the Galapagos, and Hawaii, which are made out of oceanic rock. So if you want to stay in the US, Hawaii is the perfect place to do this research. I'm working on getting a bunch of acreage out of the military on the Big Island. I want to build a campus. The campus is going to be the home of the International MoonBase Alliance. The Alliance is a group of space agencies, space companies, and space institutions. So every space agency in the world is invited. SpaceX, Blue Origin, ULA, all of their friends or competitors are invited. And then the universities, MIT, ASU, USC, whoever is doing space research, they're also invited. We should all work in one place to figure out how to build a moon base, how to build an airlock. Let's standardize the airlock. Let's make sure that we're all using metric. Let's all make sure that we're doing 100 volts or 110 volts, whatever it is. It doesn't matter, as long as it's the same. And then the way that the inside of the moon base should work is it should work like an international airport. Everybody has landing rights. Once you get in, you lose your national identity. Once everybody seems to get along inside the airport. It doesn't seem like there's differences between races or religions, or everybody just gets along magically. Well, let's duplicate that. I think that's a very good model. Leave our guns behind, leave them at TSA, whatever it is, and go there, and everybody gets along. And by the way, if I live in Hawaii, the culture there just so happens to be that culture. When I go to a party, I see people from all kinds of ethnic and religious backgrounds, and nobody even thinks about this. Nobody asks a question, where are you from? I mean, that's not a question. It's like everybody is everybody. So that's the way I expect the moon base to work. So maybe the idea is, before we send people to the moon, they should live in Hawaii for a while.
I'm sure it'd be very popular.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Justine, tell us about Astrobotic. There you go.
Fantastic. I'm very happy to be here. My name is Justine Kasznica. I'm a shareholder at a law firm, Babst, Calland, and I was actually in DC in our offices this week and learned that the CEO of Astrobotic couldn't make it to be here and sends his sincere apologies, asked me to come and fill in for him in his stead. He's in Germany speaking with Bosch on a fun ISS project that Astrobotic is working on. I'm an attorney working with emerging technology companies, high growth companies, particularly in the automation, mobility, robotics space. And Astrobotic happens to be one of my most exciting companies that I've worked with for about a decade. And I've seen the company grow from quite literally 2 individuals to a slightly larger team, then shrink back again, and then grow. Working with an emerging technology company, backing up a little bit, Astrobotic is in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Today it's about 15 full-time employees, although with our partnerships with NASA and other organizations and companies around the world, at varying points in time, we have up to 50 people working on projects at Astrobotic. Astrobotic was founded about, at this point, 11 years ago. Again, went through a pretty interesting trajectory, which we believe now we're sort of moving into a new era of commercial growth, and I'll talk a little bit about what that means to us. What the goal of Astrobotic is to make space accessible to the world in broad terms. We are a number, and when I say we, I'll talk about Astrobotic as though I'm representing the company, not as an attorney for the company. But we are working on space technology, robotic technology, automation in space, to really make and create a lunar delivery service to the moon initially, and then to provide planetary access beyond the moon. How this was born was really an idea that came out of Carnegie Mellon University in Pittsburgh, and a strong team that galvanized around it. Oftentimes, the company has been asked, well, why the moon? Why are we thinking about space? And so whenever we're thinking about a commercial market, and I think Ken's chart actually really captured it well, a whole bunch of ingredients have to come together at the right time. It is absolutely all about timing. It is a question of having resources and investment. It is a question of having political will and an administration that really puts its backing behind enabling and growing commercialization activities and making it possible for companies like ours to grow and develop. It really is about all these ingredients coming together, but we need to look at it with a larger vision of the strategy and the possibility that places like the moon and Mars offer to these commercial companies. So we look at the moon as a potential fuel depot, a place for mining. We heard about the in-situ resource utilization plans for not our company, but other companies like ours. Manufacturing opportunities. With the growth of technology in things like additive manufacturing and others, the world is open to us for exploring and creating innovations off Earth, for creating and developing new manufacturing techniques. Of course, exploration and research, and when we're creating a commercial market in any place, it always begins with strong exploration and research partnerships and opportunities, with the idea that in the future, we actually can attain that goal of living off Earth and living off the land, not bringing everything with us, as Henk talked about, but really generating and using and creating a sustainable life presence off Earth, so that the end goal is that we think of ourselves not as solely bound to Earth, but really as a multi-planetary species. And I think everyone who comes to a conference like this has that in their mind, that yes, while the moon is our closest neighbor and absolutely the testing ground for where we do technology testing, where we figure out the nuts and bolts of this kind of off-Earth life, the end goal is that we really learn how to be a multi-planetary species. At Astrobotic, we are very, very fortunate, even though we're a very small company, early stage, high growth. The reason we're able to have the kind of technical credibility that we have is because of our world-class partners. And here's where that international collaboration is critical. First off, we wouldn't be anywhere without our partners at NASA. For the last decade, we've worked on a number of preliminary sort of grants and programs with NASA to pave the ground and pave the way for us to develop this commercial marketplace. We have a very strong partnership with Airbus that does our hardware and systems engineering. Most recently, they're developing the legs of the Peregrine lander, which is the lander that you see on the screen. And that will be our flagship initial lander to do our first initial maiden mission to the moon. Dynetics is our propulsion partner. DHL provides transportation logistics. United Launch Alliance is our strong partner that is going to provide our launch services. When we talk about a commercial market being ripe, Astrobotic has really cracked the nut, I think, on building up a pipeline of potential sales. What we're very excited to announce that we have 11 deals signed towards mission 1, the first mission, as of today, but we have about 100 potential customers in our pipeline. Customers fall into different buckets. I would say one of our strong buckets is space agencies around the globe. We also work with commercial partners that are in their own right developing the technologies and resource work that will be done once you land on the moon. So for example, Atlas Space is a great partner of ours that's developing laser communications that can make space communications much quicker. A lot of opportunity when we finally get to Mars. Sorry. We also have a number of marketing organizations and companies from around the globe that see, this off-Earth narrative as such an exciting narrative for mankind, and have developed very interesting programs for their people. A lot about space is about community engagement, and so I'll just mention one of them. Astroscale in Japan. Essentially, they've built a titanium soda can that represents an Asian soft drink that's very popular called Pocari Sweat. And so Pocari Sweat was one of the funding partners on this, and what they did was they went to the children of Southeast Asia and Asia and essentially gathered dreams. And those dreams of the children are written on this titanium band that will be flying with the Coke can. So yes, while we're now littering the moon with Coke cans or Pocari Sweat cans, the idea is that children who have their dream on the moon will receive a key that can unlock that can someday in the future when they too can visit. Again, it's, while it may seem a little bit gimmicky, the idea is that we want to broaden the community and the community that really cares about this stuff. So in the last, I would say, several years, we've really seen, with this administration especially, a push towards return to the moon and significant resources behind this. We've just heard the president's announced budget earlier this week, which really supports what we're doing and other companies like ours. We are fortunate to be one of the 9 CLIPS elected or awarded grantees or selected companies for CLIPS, and we have submitted for the task order just recently and are waiting to hear on that. There's many programs like this to come that we are looking to take advantage of. We can't emphasize how important the public-private partnership is with NASA and the government to really make a commercial market happen in this very emerging the early days of the emerging tech space. So just very briefly, Peregrine's our first lander. We're using that as a general technical model for a larger scale lander to follow that can bring rovers, which right now we're looking at small cube rovers to do initial exploration research work on the moon. But over time, we're really keying in on exploring the South Pole and the poles of the moon for ice exploration and utilization. And Polaris is the larger concept rover for that project. So I wanted to end by saying, we view ourselves as really an American company that's democratizing space for the world. We are offering a low-cost service to fly whatever needs to do exploration, research, utilization on the moon for countries and individuals from all around the globe. A great narrative, we have one of our payload customers is Nepal, and we worked with one of the poorest countries on Earth so that their students could build a STEM program around lunar science and lunar exploration. The commercial market allows that to happen at a cost that's reasonable for even Nepal to have its moon moment. And so that is why, that's really the reason for being for our country, for the company and for Astrobotic. Of course, it's a high-risk business, so we de-risk some of the work that we do with other robotic, precision landing technology and other ancillary technologies that will help make that market grow even quicker. With that, I thank you.
Thank you. We've got 6 minutes, according to the clock at the front here, so let's go to the questions from the audience. Try to keep them short and to the point. Let's begin right here.
Yeah, hi. My name is Svetlana Ryhova-Tibets. I participated in the Mars project. We made CD, and it is on Mars now, for interplanetary communication. Now I'm the second day at the conference. I have a question. What constitution will be on Moon and Mars? Constitution.
As in political constitution.
Now, about listen, because it is like international project, and what currency will dominate there, what language, and so on.
Yeah. I mean, I'll take
Thank
a quick
you.
crack before, because I want to contextualize what Hank's going to say, because I know what Hank's going to say. You know, what's so interesting about now is that because we're looking at a moment where people are going to have transportation capabilities, a lot of different groups, like Hank's group, are looking at trying to set up their social communities. I know at least 2 other groups, along with Hank's group, that are kind of looking at that, who have significant backing potentially. Whether it's significant enough to achieve the objective is an open question, but it's non-trivial. And so I think what's so interesting is that we're in this moment where we're going to have the opportunity to experiment with these things. I don't think there's going to be one constitution on any planetary body other than Earth, just like there isn't one constitution for the Earth. There is going to be a multiplicity of it, and there's going to be experimentation. And in fact, that's exactly what we should be striving for.
Henk.
You know, we can sit here and think about what's going to happen on the moon before it actually happens, and we're going to be wrong. We can make a constitution, and they're going to be up there thinking, what the hell were those guys thinking? So I see a lot of people talking about space law and so on and so forth, but you know, people are going to do what they're going to do on the moon, so I say let them decide about their own constitution.
As the lawyer on the panel,
That's right. Get legal advice. Counselor.
I want to make sure we understand that even today, we are governed by the Outer Space Treaty,
Yes.
which many of the nations across the globe are signatories to, which do carve out the principles and the guiding parameters of how we as nations interact off Earth. And so that will be our guiding principle, and short of getting amendments to the Outer Space Treaty, we're going to be bound by that. So we already have a framework, but that framework does allow for significant flexibility and creativity for individuals and organizations and nations to really...
I want to get a few more questions in, but you're absolutely right. The Outer Space Treaty of 1967 has been signed by all the spacefaring and wannabe spacefaring nations, I think, except North Korea and Iran, maybe. Another question, sir.
Yes, good afternoon. This is Edmund Mashi from EMAC. My question is, who should we contact? Because EMAC is building a new brand computer, which will be connected in multiple countries, multiple systems, which is called hybrid network computer. Who should we contact to?
Contact for?
Contract for grants or something?
Yeah, EMAC is building a new computer, which will be on the hybrid network. So maybe you guys might need it in the space.
Did anybody understand that?
Let me see if I understood your question. Who should you contact? You're in the process of designing a new computer. Who should you contact?
Yes.
I don't know.
Companies, people who buy. Well, I'll tell. Quick answer is, people who are buying computers for these things are the companies, right? The computers are components for these larger systems, and for NASA, I would look at the SBIR annual catalog.
Small Business Innovative Research.
Yeah, that's the NASA place.
Yeah.
Okay.
Another question, Clive, I think. Sir.
Yeah, Clive Neal, Notre Dame. Great panel, great vision. Ken, your charts probably need some work, but I couldn't understand it, but geologist. So.
Sorry.
Question is, we've started this journey to go to the moon, and we're doing it very differently this time, which gives me a lot of hope that it might actually work. So how do we develop these markets? We've got the CLIPS program. What's next after that? It seems to me that the best way to, if I can use the phrase from Paul Spudis, to bring the moon into our economic sphere of influence is human permanence on the moon. That would then drive the commercial side and then allow NASA to spend money to go to Mars and then bring Mars into our economic sphere of influence as well. What's the progression, if you like, of this very exciting emerging market?
So what I'm going to do is make that the last question, because they're almost out of time, and give each panelist in turn a chance to address that, which is really the fundamental issue of the panel.
Yep, great.
Go ahead.
So a couple things. I mean, let's give these programs times to play out, for one thing, right? I mean, we all want to get on to the moon and Mars literally yesterday. But these things are going to take a long period of time to translate, right? I mean, my favorite science fiction author is probably Olaf Stapleton, because he talked about these processes playing out over thousands of years. And maybe that's just because I work in the government. But I do think that a little bit of patience is helpful, as is expectations management. CLIPS is an incredible experiment. NASA's never run an experiment like this in planetary science. And I think it's a really important one, and I'm really excited to see what happens. I think for humans, the example of the International Space Station is very instructive, right? By having infrastructure and humans that are there, we have had reasons to continue to innovate within our supply chain to create new launch capabilities that are beginning to reduce the cost of access. I think that general model is what we're going to need, both in lunar orbit and on the lunar surface. By having humans in both places, on either a permanent basis or an irregular basis, however it is, we're going to have supply chains. And as a result, we can innovate within those supply chains over years and decades. So I think that's going to be really key. There is a proviso, though, which is that currently we are still awaiting our first paying space tourist since the last one, which I think was in around 2008 or 2009 for low Earth orbit. We have had a couple of people mention their intent to fly around the moon. Harry McPike, in fact, just settled his lawsuit outside of arbitration with Space Adventures. So we know that there is a demand for it, as Henk identified. The question is at what cost? That was actually the central note of Jeff Bezos' presentation last week, which is that there's a lot of things that we want to do, but how much, do we, what does it cost to go do it? So I think we need to have patience, but we need to focus on those pieces of anchor demand that humans can kind of uniquely present that we've seen in LEO and extend that both to lunar orbit and the lunar surface.
Done. Ken, take a minute and tell us.
I'll take a minute. I really appreciate Alex's comments because things aren't 10 to 20 years away, they're 10 to 20 decades away, right? So when you start putting them in that context, that we've got to do what we can do, we've got to be looking at not only at the science and the technology and the business model kind of activities, we've got to do a lot of market creation. Yeah, there's a bunch of tech geeks here who want to go to Moon and Mars, but we're not the majority. Most people aren't really interested in that. And so you've got to create that market. It's just not going to be so cool that everybody wants to do it. There's got to be a lot of human resource development, more conferences, technology, or conferences, meetings, journals, whatever, to make this a taken for granted part of society. There's a whole lot of policy, law, regulation that needs to develop, not only at the federal level, at the state level, even the local levels. Spaceports are being developed. They tend to be funded by local or state governments. And so working the relationships between the federal and the state levels, especially the ranges, is a big deal. Getting past the inertia of the existing systems. I mean, we could be super, super innovative, but we're only going to be a small fraction of society, and the rest of the majority are going to be resisting that innovation. So getting past that. So it's a social issue. It's not a technological issue, and it's not even a financial issue, right? So there's this principle that just says it's going to, I wanted to go back to the 2001, when I moved to Berlin. We got there right before a mayoral election, and the wall had been down for 10 years. And I forget who was running against who, but it was absolutely true. You could look at the results of that election and you could see exactly where the wall was. The wall was still up in people's minds, and that was 1 decade later. It's still there. The Aussies versus the Westies is still going on, the East versus West. So it's going to take a lot of work, and so we just need to keep pushing forward.
Yeah, so I'll just take Manhattan. So once upon a time, let's ignore the people that were there when we got there, but some explorers came and found this island called Manhattan, and some intrepid explorer traded Manhattan for $24 worth of stuff. And that was the beginning. And then the entrepreneurs in the Netherlands and the Dutch government said, there could be something there. And so then the Dutch East India Company was formed, which is a combination of industry and government and industry, private sector. And Then it grew and grew and grew, and it started looking real good. And then the British said, "We like that," and then they took over. And then the people who were there said, "You know, we don't actually like the British. We're going to have our own thing," and they started America. The point is, what 8 million, 10 million people living in Manhattan now. We didn't predict this when we first landed in Manhattan. And I'm not sure that we can, but I can tell you this. Every place that we've gone that had resources has turned into and started with a Manhattan, and that's what we're here to do.
Justine, you've got the final word.
3 points. First, regulatory certainty, and I think some of that was mentioned. We absolutely need to have clear pathways for international collaboration, export controls as it relates to space, understanding how our payloads get processed and approved and accepted, making sure that flows within the proper authorities of the various functions of government. Without that, in an uncertain regulatory environment, investors get cold feet, companies worry, and it spirals downwards. Secondarily, it's political will, sustained political will. The challenge with our system of government is that we fluctuate, in parties and fluctuate leadership and administrations. And what we need to be very careful about so that this moon moment doesn't lapse is to build on what was built and the momentum and the energy that we've created and are building currently without letting it lapse and kind of fall back into what I call a nothing burger. Mm-hmm. With the political sustained will, it's also about really encouraging, to Henk's point, public-private partnerships so that this isn't just companies working in isolation. It's not just the government working in isolation. The two have to complement each other and grow together to achieve success. And then finally, and I would probably say this is the most important, there has to be a tolerance for failure and agile iteration and development. I was very gratified to see that when Bereshit crash landed recently, and that was such an innovative project. Israel just put in $5 million more to do Bereshit 2.0. That didn't have to happen. That is exactly the kind of tolerance for failure and iteration that we will need to see happen if we're serious about building a sustainable future in space.
A wonderful note to end up on. Let's thank our panel one more time.